live now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Nature in Your Classroom live stream. We are going to be going live in 3, and 2, and 1.
Hello, my friends. I am so excited for today. We are talking about natural materials and how they kind of connect to our festivities this time of year. My name is Raya. Some of you might have met me on previous live streams. And if you haven't, then it's such a pleasure to meet you now for the first time. And so I'm actually a teacher with Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. You can see our logo there. And when it comes to conservation, that's kind of like helping to protect the environment, right, and not use it all up and conserve it. So that has to do with using more natural materials than materials that might take a lot of processing, synthetic kind of materials. So that's what we're talking about today and tying it in with this time of year. Now, we have some other folks that are helping out. Jasmine, if you can come on and say hello. Jasmine is helping with the tech on the back end.
Hello, everyone.
And we've got some folks who are helping out in the chat as well. So if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make in the chat, then please do. We want to keep it a respectful chat, of course, but teachers, if you're with a class of students and want to put some student questions or comments in the chat, you're welcome to do so. And we'll answer them at the end of the live stream. We'll take some time for questions, but we can also answer them during the live stream, potentially in the chat. We have some folks on the back end monitoring that. Now, if you have a worksheet, then, and Jasmine can pull up what the worksheet looks like, then you'll notice that this time the worksheet's a little different than usual. We have some ideas in the worksheet for crafts that you can make with some things that you might have at home. So enjoy that if you are able to get the worksheet. Oh yes, the link for the worksheet is going to be popping up in the chat, so you can register for that and you'll get an automatic email to where to find it. It's also in the description for the live stream. I think those are all the things I need to let you know about before we get right into our topic today. So we actually have a special guest today, and I'm so excited about this. Anthony from Black Creek Pioneer Village is joining us to share information about natural materials that have been used and can be used even today in order to help create some decor in this festive season. So Anthony, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have a really great bunch of fun ornaments that you can make at home and that people used to make at home in the 1860s. So let's get started with talking a little bit about some of the materials that I'm going to be using today. Of course, the first thing that we should talk about is the Christmas tree itself. So Christmas trees have been around actually since the 1400s or so, but they really started to get popular at the end of the 18th century. Originally, they were just trees that were outside. People would start decorating them with all sorts of different goodies, and eventually people started bringing them in. And around this time of year, as most of the natural world starts to kind of go away and die a little bit, it was a good remembrance of the kind of evergreen life that was outside. So people would bring in trees, and actually this size of tree, the tabletop tree, is kind of the original size for many people. Trees like this, the idea of a Christmas tree anyway, came from Germany. And by the 1860s, many people here in Ontario were also using tabletop trees, and also some taller ones as well, although the tabletop was kind of the original one. So we have here a bunch of different objects that we can put on our trees. And the first original ornaments that were often put on Christmas trees were this kind of basic things that you can find in nature. In fact, a lot of the original Christmas tree ornaments were fruit and nuts. So I have a piece of an apple here. So in the 1860s, many early settlers would dry apples like this into slices, and they would cut those up and put them on our Christmas tree. Also, they would look outside and find lots of things in nature that are very easily able to find at this time of year. So pine cones, for example. Pine cones are a really fun decoration that you can place all over your tree. But they also sometimes would find things like nuts. So originally, nuts like walnuts would have been attached to your tree, just like this. And if you had a little bit more money, you sometimes would paint them. So these ones, of course, now aren't edible anymore, but they make a really nice decoration, and you would put them all over your tree. So I'll put some of these ones there for us today. Now, outside at this time of year, a lot of early settlers would also find these. Now, this is a milkweed pod. It's the part of the milkweed where the seeds come in. And they kind of grow and seed in the fall, and in the wintertime, they're still kind of around. So what a lot of early settlers would do is take these milkweed pods, break them in half like this, and then place them on their tree. And oftentimes they would actually use that as a tree topper. So they might put a whole bunch of them up there. They might paint them different colors, often a golden color, and make them into other small decorations as well. So you can see a lot of the things were things that they could just see in their own environment. But one of the other things, of course, about this evergreen tree is that they like to put things that kind of reminded them of the spring or in the summer. And one of the things that we see in the very earliest Christmas trees are actually paper flowers like this one here. Because of course, by this point, most flowers have gone. But what many early settlers would do is instead of making a paper tree, they would take different types of flowers, like the cornflower that you see here, and they would dry them in the spring and fall, and summer and fall, and then preserve them for the wintertime. And then they would create these little bouquets, and this is called a tussie-mussy. So basically you can put any kind of flower you want in it. Sometimes they're fragrant flowers. We even have some little stalks of wheat because many of the farmers in this area were wheat farmers. So they're placing a number of different types of materials together to create these really nice tussie-mussies. And these also work really well, not only on your tree, but just also kind of around your house, which is kind of a fun one. Now, at this time of year, many early settlers would also have access to certain goods that they wouldn't have had throughout most of the other part of the year. One example of this is oranges. Oranges would have to come all the way from Spain. So it was kind of a nice treat to have an orange at Christmas time. That's why even today we sometimes think of oranges as going into stockings. It comes from this time when oranges were kind of hard to get. A lot of other types of Christmas associated things were also kind of hard to get. Things like spices, so cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, allspice. These all have to come from the Spice Islands, which are fairly far away. They can't grow here in Canada. So you would have to buy something like this at a general store. So a lot of early settlers would use these kinds of festive smells and fruits to make Christmas ornaments. And one of the ones that they would do quite often is this one here. This is called a pomander. Now this pomander here is actually made with allspice, but generally they're made with cloves. And what you would do is take an orange and you would pierce the orange and put the cloves inside and cover the orange completely. And as you do that, what happens is the orange will dry up and it gives out this beautiful scent. And this can be used, again, not only for a Christmas ornament, but also as kind of a potpourri for your house around this time of year. So this one here has a little bit of allspice on it and a little cinnamon stick. And we like to put that on our tree in a really nice visible spot. So we'll put that one there. And of course, if you didn't want to have the whole pomander, because at this point you really wouldn't want to eat that, you could also just slice up your oranges and dry them like this too. So many of the things that are edible on this tree would actually be used as a kind of Christmas treat. So during Christmas Day, you could go through the tree and find some of these edible things and eat them. Another really good example of that is candy, because in the 1860s, sugar was still quite expensive. So to have candies at Christmas time was another real treat. So many families would create these little cones of paper and place a number of different goodies inside and hang them up on their tree for a little snack on Christmas Day. Another great snack that you could have would be these gingerbread cookies. Now, as I said, many of the families that were living here in Ontario in the 1860s were farmers. In fact, 7 out of 10 families in Ontario at that time were farmers, and 90% of those farmers were wheat farmers. So they're taking wheat and creating things like flour out of them. So they would take it to a local mill and grind their own flour. That means that flour-based products like gingerbread and other cookies were really popular a lot of the time throughout the year, but gingerbread especially was popular at Christmas time. So they would create gingerbread cookies, which of course many of us still do today. And again, they would place it on their tree so that on Christmas Day, they would have a really fun, delicious thing to have. Now, as time went on into the later 1800s, we started seeing a change in terms of the materials that we're using. Like today, we see a lot of kind of materials that we can't find in nature, but they often were still representative of nature. They still were made to look like that. So as time progressed, things like nuts would turn into glass ornaments like this acorn. So acorns like this became incredibly popular, and they would be glass blown, often again from Germany, and being brought to and bought in stores. So again, it still has a natural look to it, but it's not a natural material anymore. Another really good example of that too is this. This here is a piece of the original tinsel. So oftentimes we think of tinsel today as being kind of like a plasticky paper that kind of goes around. Well, tinsel in the 1860s was actually made out of tin. So they would take a small piece of tin, often made by a tinsmith, and they would cut it and twist it to form an icicle shape. So again, it's kind of still reminiscent of the season. Another really interesting thing that a lot of early settlers did, which we don't do as much today, is that in the 1860s, they would put the presents inside of the tree. And in the 1860s, many of the presents were still homemade. And one really popular present would be something made out of wool. So many farmers would also have sheep on their farm, and they would create products out of wool for the wintertime. So this hat, for example, would have had to have been made completely out of the sheep's wool, knitted, and then that would be your gift, and probably one of your only gifts, in fact. Now, it actually takes quite a while to make something like this. For example, to make enough yarn into, or enough wool into yarn in the 1860s using a spinning wheel, that could take about 6 hours of work. So a hat like this could take between 6 and 10, and that's just for the material itself, not the time it would take to do all the crocheting or knitting as well. So you would actually put on your Christmas tree some of your lovely Christmas gifts and presents, and that would also adorn your tree. So this year, maybe you can try some very interesting and fun different ways of decorating your Christmas tree using things that you can find in nature or around your house.
I was on mute. Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you so much, Anthony, for sharing those fantastic craft ideas from natural materials. And I actually am really excited about getting crafty. I got a bit crafty the other day, last night, because I'm getting ready for an event that is happening on Tuesday. And this is an event that's connected really strongly with the natural world. So I'm going to show you a little later what I made. It's a bit of a lantern, but I'll show you it a little bit later. And in the meantime, I would like to ask you what event you think I'm talking about. So what is happening on Tuesday, December 21st, that is super important for the natural world, for human life, for wildlife? I'll give you some hints. Let's see, what have you noticed happening outside recently? This is something that's going to change next week. And, oh, this event has to do with the sun. So if you think you might know, you can put it in the chat. What event am I talking about? Like I said, this is an event that affects human life and wildlife and all kinds of life on this planet. You might have noticed that it's getting so very dark early this time of year. It's getting darker and darker, earlier and earlier. And this event is called the winter solstice, after which it starts to get lighter. So since June, since the summer solstice, our days have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then as of Tuesday, they're going to start getting longer and longer and longer again. So the winter solstice is a really important event that is taking place next week, and I love to celebrate it. I always love thinking about where do words come from and what do they really mean. So I'm going to back up a little bit here. Let's break the word solstice down. The word sol, some of you might know it from another language. From Latin, it actually means sun. And then stis means, it comes from a word that means to stand still. So the sun, actually, I'm going to ask you to think, imagine yourself living in ancient times before we had any of this modern technology that we have now. And imagine that, you know how important the sun is for your life and for the how long days are really important for you. And you're seeing that the sun is disappearing. We're having shorter and shorter days. and there's less and less sun. It's kind of traveling in a southward direction. And then when it starts to reappear, we get our days longer again. That moment when that changes is when the sun is kind of standing still. It stops traveling south. And what an amazing thing that is to recognize, okay, the sun isn't going to disappear altogether. It's coming back. So that idea of solstice, the sun standing still, and then our days starting to get longer. There are lots of ways that people celebrate the winter solstice. Some people like to find a really special spot to watch the sunrise on that day. And this is a photo of the sun rising over Lake Ontario on the winter solstice day, which is such a special spot to watch it. Now, before COVID, I every year would go down to a festival, a parade in Toronto, in Kensington Market, and it's a solstice parade. So I'd go to this parade. This is a picture I took the last time I went a few years ago. And there are people who dress up. You can see that big costume in the back in orange. Looks like they're dressed up as an animal that's like, oh, I can wake up again. It's getting sunnier. People make lanterns. There are actually lantern making workshops. So you can see some of the lanterns in there as well. And the parade ends at a huge, huge bonfire that's celebrating light, celebrating the sun. And it's a really magnificent time. And I'm looking so forward to when we can have that event again to celebrate the solstice. So this is where I'm going to show you the craft that I made. So it's not exactly from, like, directly from natural materials, like these plants behind me. It is from metal, but it's metal that I pulled out of my recycling bin. So I made a lantern. And it's just a can from my recycling. And I used some wire to make a handle for my lantern. And I used a hammer and a nail. And I had my sister help me hold the can steady so we were safe about it. And I made some holes in it. And inside, there is a candle. And when it's lit up at night, you can see in this picture, then it looks very, very cool. And I'm actually going, since the parade can't happen, I'm going to a friend's backyard. And we're all going to honor the sun and bring the solstice in together. So I'm really excited about that on Tuesday. And I encourage you, if you want to make your own lantern, I'm sure you have the materials at home to make something, whether it's out of paper and you don't put a candle in it, or it's something that you can put a candle in. So, Raya, why are you talking about this? We're talking about natural materials. Well, this is an event that I feel ties really well into this conversation about natural materials because it's so strongly connected to the natural world. We know that the solstice is really important because light offers us warmth and offers food. Plants can grow only with light. And it's so important that there are festivals and events throughout the year celebrating light. So I want you to think about what kind of celebrations of light might take place in your family. Maybe not at this time of year, maybe a different time of year. But what kind of celebrations of light do you celebrate with your family and your culture? Maybe Diwali, light over dark, right? Maybe you celebrate Hanukkah, this idea of light lasting longer than expected. And in your life, you have probably made crafts that have included symbols from these different celebrations of light from your festivals or your events, your festivities. So light is a big deal. Now, I mentioned wildlife and how these longer days might be important for wildlife. So think about that for a moment. Think about if you were a little forest creature and you're noticing that the days are getting longer and you're kind of getting a sense that maybe it'll be easier to find food pretty soon with these longer days. Maybe it's time to start making babies soon, right? So the solstice brings in this new season and new behaviors and instincts in wildlife. An example of an animal who does actually have babies really soon are bears. So the black bear, they actually have their young in January because when the food is ready in the spring, the cubs need to be old enough to be able to go around and find their food. So they need to be old enough to be able to move on their own by that point. You might hear owls hooting more at this time of year because they actually mate really early. So this is a great horned owl. And when owls are born, they have so much to learn about being owls, more than other bird species. And so they actually start earlier in making babies. Now, we often think about spring as being this time of renewal, right? We see green starting to come up and such. But if we go a little bit backwards into this time of year, then we realize that solstice, winter solstice, is a really important part of this cycle. So without longer days, without more light, we wouldn't have spring at all. And it's really, I think it's really cool to think about this cycle of solstice and spring and just how everything is connected in that way. Now, if you are interested in celebrating solstice, I really encourage you to do so. There are so many different ways. You can come up with your own way to honor the light, honor the sun. And something people like to do is go for a long walk and kind of just recognize, like, wow, I'm part of this amazing natural world. And the day's getting longer on Tuesday is part of that as well. So you can go for a nice long walk on Tuesday during the day or at night. You can maybe make a lantern, like I said, of your own with whatever materials you can find. Maybe you can, if you like to bake, you can make cookies in the shape of a sun, just for fun. So there are lots of things that you can do for solstice. I can take you on a little bit of a walk here of where I am right now and show some of the things that could be used if you have these in your own yard, if you have a yard. I'm actually in a public space in Toronto, so I'm not going to pick anything, but I can show you that there are some plants that could have some lovely decor pieces out here. I mean, they're beautiful on the plants themselves. We've got some rose hips here. So these are some things that could be used if you're making a special lantern or if you wanted to hang them on a string. And I believe that Anthony might have mentioned milkweed. And so you can see that there is lots of milkweed here. And if you have a yard, maybe you have some milkweed growing in your yard as well. I almost look at these pods. Let's see if I can show you one more closely. But these pods could almost be like a mini lantern of their own in a way with the way they're shaped. Super cool. So my friends, I think we have a few questions that we'd love to answer. And if you do need to go at this point, then we want to thank you so much for joining us. But if you have questions, then now's the time so we can get right into answering some of your questions about anything Anthony has shared or anything that I've shared as well.
Amazing. So I do have some questions here that have come in. So Anthony, you're mentioning the pomander, which is made by using an orange. And I wanted to ask, can you make a pomander with any other types of fruit other than an orange?
Yeah, you definitely can. In fact, in the 1860s, a lot of families, to make a pomander, of course, that's something that you're not going to eat, right? So a lot of families, if they were going to spend the money to buy an orange, were going to eat it and not use it for a pomander. But there are lots of other types of fruit that they probably had around that were cheaper. So you can actually make pomanders out of things like pears and also even apples as well.
Awesome. That's great. So Raya, yourself and Anthony, you both mentioned milkweed. And so I'm wondering what even is milkweed, and can you tell me more about it?
Oh my goodness, I could talk about milkweed for a whole other hour. So milkweed is a plant that you might have heard about when you perhaps have been learning about monarch butterflies, because the monarch butterfly is a butterfly who will only lay their eggs on milkweed because they're young. Their caterpillar can only eat the milkweed leaf. And it's one of our native plant species. This one is common milkweed. There are some different types. And in order for the milkweed to spread and make more of themselves, because plants like to have babies too, they produce seeds. That's why plants produce seeds, right? And these seeds, you can see them. Maybe I'll take a couple of seeds out of the pod here. You can see them up close in just a moment as I adjust my camera. Here we go. We have got some lovely milkweed seeds that can fly around in order for the for the plant to spread. And the pods are what the milkweed seeds develop in before they're ready. And then in the fall, the pod will crack open. You can see these cracks here, and then the seeds can burst out. And each pod can have, they can even have like 200 seeds in one pod. And then what's left behind would be an empty pod, like this one back here, almost empty. And that can be used for natural materials, for decor.
Amazing. That makes so much sense. We had a great question come in the chat, actually 2 questions from Mari Lady. They're asking, can anyone celebrate solstice? And what time do you have to wake up to celebrate winter solstice?
Oh, I love it. Anybody can celebrate solstice. What I find interesting about solstice is there are so many events that have sprang from it that then become like this culture celebrates that, this culture celebrates this, like Christmas. Not everybody celebrates Christmas, right? But Christmas, I think it was that Christmas is this time of year because it's that light returning, that idea. But with solstice, it's not connected to a culture or religion. It is just a beautiful, natural, I mean, you can say scientific, but natural phenomenon that happens. And so anybody in the entire world can celebrate it. And if you wanted to wake up to watch the sunrise, what time is the sun rising right now? I think it's something around, is it between 7 and 8? I know that the solstice time this Tuesday is at 10:58. But that's not when the sun rises. That's when the sun is at its like lowest declination, if you want to get into the scientific terms. Then maybe somebody on our back end can look up what time the sun rises. And then you can head out to a special spot to check out the sunrise at that time. I want to say it's between 7 and 8, but I have to look up the exact number. Yeah, and so, and you can celebrate the sunrise, or you can just celebrate the day or the evening, because that Tuesday night is the longest night of the year. And I mean, darkness is cool to celebrate too. So you can kind of like celebrate that nighttime as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I just checked. It looks like on Tuesday, the sun is rising at 7:48 a.m.
Excellent, 7:48. So a little bit before that is good, because then you get to see the dawn.
That's a great point. Anthony, I think this question is for you. We got a question asking, you mentioned that glass ornament that was made out of, or in the shape of an acorn. And so the question is asking, was the glass ornament considered expensive back then? And do you think the average family could have afforded it?
That's an excellent question. So for most of the 1860s, they would have been fairly expensive. But by the late 1870s and 1880s, they're being imported throughout North America, and they're starting to get a little cheaper. Remember, the mid-1800s was a time of huge changes into industrialization. So we're starting to see more factories and the ability to make certain materials cheaper and also quicker. So for the early part of the 1800s, yes, it would have been a fairly expensive thing. By kind of the later 1800s, it becomes more economical, shall we say, for the average family. With that being said, though, not every family went directly to doing glass ornaments when they became cheap. In fact, a lot of families still, even to this day, enjoy making their own Christmas ornaments, and that's kind of a tradition that was kept on as well.
Awesome. That's great. It looks like we have one last question. And Anthony, I think this one is for you. The question is, how many sheep, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question, how many sheep are needed to make one hat?
It's an excellent question. So each sheep produces between 7 to 10 pounds of wool. So you probably only need one sheep to produce a hat. But with that being said, the average family in the 1860s would need between 7 and 8 sheep to produce all of the wool clothes that they need. Remember, families often were quite a lot larger too. So for example, the Stong family that lived on our property here at Black Creek, they had 8 children, right? So that's 10 people in their family, which is quite a lot of material that you'll need. But yeah, for a hat, you probably only need one sheep.
Awesome, that's great. I think that's all the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much for your wonderful answers, both of you.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I actually came across where I am right now. There was a loose piece of this plant. See if that's in focus. That was on the ground. And this is one of my favorite plants. It's a shrub. And if you're able to tell, the stem actually is kind of fuzzy, which is kind of cool. But I love this one in the fall and winter because these colors that we often think about fall being drab, everything's brown. Well, fall actually still has those orange and yellow colors, but late fall and then winter, we think about these just browns and stuff. But there's so much red. You can see the red dogwood plant behind me in the rose hips, and you can see this one is called sumac with the red berries. So we've been talking about natural materials for things that we might use, but a lot of these natural materials are already out here as kind of decoration and usefulness, right? I've seen lots and lots of birds eating the sumac. So just wanted to add that since I came across those beautiful berries just now. It has been such a delight today to share our world of natural materials and solstice and talking about all of this with you, my friends. And we want to thank Anthony so much for joining us today. We have a live stream coming up on January 12th after the new year about winter birding. So it's officially for grades 6 to 8, but anybody's welcome to join to learn about birding in the winter and how to do some stewardship that way. So I hope you join us then. And in the meantime, we want to wish you a wonderful holiday season. I encourage you, like I said, to celebrate the solstice and see what kinds of crafts you can make out of natural materials. Some of those great ideas that Anthony talked about and that are in the worksheet yourselves to kind of really get you into that festive mood. So thank you, everybody. We look forward to next year and seeing you again. Goodbye, my friends.